Everyone, good morning. Thanks for joining us. We have a really fantastic webinar in store for you guys on conditional formatting in Power BI. Greg Bounds is one of our senior data analysts at the IronEdge Group, and he's prepared some really awesome content for you guys. But first, before we dive into the meat of the webinar, I'd love to introduce IronEdge to you. So IronEdge Group has been a technology consulting company based out of Texas for around the last 15 years, and we have clients all throughout the Americas. And we like to pride ourselves on a really unique BI delivery model. We've been doing Power BI for around the last 4.5, 5 years, and the team's moved into the Power Platform, and we engage with our clients in a lot of different ways. Greg? Perfect. So the way we engage with our clients is we can come in as BI as a service and really help augment your team. We're fully outsourced. We do anywhere from 20 hours a month to 80 hours a month to really help you meet your data and analytics goals. We also offer customized Power BI training that now we've begun doing virtually so that we can help teams get up to speed on everything they need to be successful with their Power Platform initiatives. And we also offer traditional projects and waterfall type solutions where we work in a fixed scope capacity to really help you guys push your projects over the finish line and deliver the excellent service models, visualization, and data modeling that you guys need. But with that being said, that's enough of our sales spiel. I'm going to kick it over to Greg so that he can introduce himself. He has a lot of qualifications and he's a fantastic resource on the IronEdge team.
Oh, thanks, Cassandra, for that nice introduction. I'll agree with most of it. So hello, everyone. My name is Greg Bounds. As Cassandra said, I'm a data analyst with IronEdge Group. There's me with definitely a pre-quarantine haircut. And I've been with the IronEdge about a year and a half. And on our team, we're primarily data consultants. We work in Power BI every day. We also do some data engineering. And I'm also one of the co-leaders of the Houston Power BI user group. And we're doing virtual meetings right now. So if you want to just Google like Meetup Houston Power BI, you'll find our page. You can join our Meetup group and you'll get updates on our virtual meetings, which we'll have this month and next month at the very least. And as far as my background, I have like an academia, research, nonprofit background. My education was heavy on the social sciences, but I got very interested in data and using data to evaluate social and government programs. That kind of led to a master's in public health, but I've always been pretty quant heavy and very fascinated with data. So on to our presentation today, I would say our session objectives. So first of all, let me say when I say conditional formatting, I'm going to be also talking about what you may hear of as expression-based formatting, dynamic formatting. Just assume it's all the same thing. I'm just going to refer to it as conditional formatting because that's my go-to use for it. But when you read about it on other blogs, you'll see a couple other names for it. So anyone who's heard me present before knows I love to talk about data models and Power Query and M, and there's none of that here today. We're gonna dive into a little DAX, but today's mostly about visual options and making sure you know that they exist. So I'm gonna sprinkle in some suggestions on when to use them, maybe when not to use them. But a lot of today is gonna be up to you and your audience, your users of your Power BI report about how far you want to go with conditional formatting, where you need it, and whether or not it adds to your report or if it's just too much. So specifically, I'm gonna discuss a little bit about what conditional formatting is, where it is, why you might use it, the different types of conditional formatting. I'm gonna highlight some areas in Power BI that are capable of conditional formatting, which every month that expands a little bit more. And then I'm going to get into some DAX functions for what I would call advanced conditional formatting. And a lot of that has to do with returning text values in your dynamic titles versus colors. And then finally, I'll get into some demos so you can actually see it in action. So the bulk of today's presentation will be the demos, but I have this nice little PowerPoint introduction, so especially for those of you who are new to this. So what is conditional formatting? And this is this is my definition. Apologies if it's not entirely accurate if you're an expert. I would say it's the visual settings that allow you to specify visual colors, text, icons based on field values. And, it's usually found in the formatting pane. It can allow you to really make your visuals pop. The field values must be numeric, or if you're returning text, it should be like a color code or a hex code. And they also have like a returning web URI values to recognize URLs. But if you're basing your condition on a string value, you need to somehow translate that string value into a numeric or color code. And what I mean by that is if you're returning a yes or a no, and you need to conditionally format based on that, you're going to want to change that to returning a 1 or a 0. So that's what I mean by returning numeric codes. So as I said, nearly every month, Power BI development team reaches additional formatting options, and the April, specifically in a very timely update, the April 2020 update put a little FX button next to these options, and it's much better than the very subtle option before where you had to kind of hover over the ellipses to try to find the ellipses for conditional formatting. So if you haven't already, I would strongly recommend updating your Power BI to the latest version. So why use conditional formatting? So a big reason that I love it is reclaiming space on your canvas and in your visuals. So for example, and I'll go over this specific example in the demo, but if you have like a single big card with something like a % sales goal, you can move that into a title instead of having it take its space on your report. Another reason I would say is spicing up your visuals, and here's another example from our demo. We're gonna have trending sales. You can format it for your company's KPI values, make it a little more interesting. It also, as I say here, that provide at a glance details. If I've got this as KPI colors, red, yellow, green, blue being the best, red being the worst, I can glance this and see that the month of March was a good month. It was green, and we met our sales goal. And this is especially important when you look at a chart like this, and if you've got very small differences in your KPI, you can see the difference between the month and the goal is very, very small. And without the conditional formatting, you're going to have to do a lot of hovering and really closely looking at it to see if you actually made your goal or if you're a little below, a little above. So this allows you to provide that at a glance, fast summarization of the goal. And finally, here's another little example that I hope to show, assuming we have time. You can kind of create like hide and show message alerts based on values. And this is another really powerful tool in Power BI with overlaying cards on other visuals, and you can make these kind of cards or shapes almost appear they're almost like they're invisible until you click on something or that cross filters a value that you want to flag. I'm going to pause for a second here because my colleague just reminded me that I forgot to mention the Q&A box. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is a Q&A button. You can use that to ask questions. If you ask a question while I'm presenting, I probably will ignore you to the end, but feel free to queue them up now. Otherwise, I may respond live if it's timely. So let's keep going. So best practices. So these are, again, just kind of my definition of best practices. But I would say with colors, when you're conditionally formatting colors, based on a value not in the visual, and you want to add it to the tooltip. So there's kind of two things hidden in here. So if you can conditionally format a visual and you're basing it on the value that's being displayed in the visual, you may not be adding a whole lot. If you're representing your total sales over time and you format that by highest total sales to lowest total sales, that may not be a good example of how to use conditional formatting. It's nice to use it when you're adding in another value into the visual and you want to represent that. So, because people can already see the bars on your bar chart, right? But the conditional formatting allows them to look at a second metric without having to hover anything. They can get that at a glance synopsis. But I would say you should add that value to your tooltip, because if people say, wait, why is this a darker color? They can hover over and see what the actual value is. So next, I would ensure your color formatting values are easy to understand. Make sure these are things that, if you made them up, that people understand them, and that, or people just know what they are. I'm very guilty of this. I've made up some metrics and I've added to visuals and people don't know what they mean. So make sure that it's something that may be established by your company. And don't conditionally format just to do so. So it's really easy to get carried away with this stuff. So, but a lot of times a plain simple bar chart is fine, especially if you have just like, let's say you have a bar chart with 4 bars. You're not going to have a lot of variance potentially between 4 different bars. So it may not be worth it to format it. And you want to avoid highly correlated values. For example, if you're representing total sales over categories and you conditionally format it to show number of items sold, Well, that seems kind of obvious, right? It probably was that there were a large number of items sold in a certain category that also generated higher sales. So you may not be adding a lot. And likewise, values with little variance. If and this might you might tweak your conditional formatting to try and uh, demonstrate that small variance more. But if there's still very little, it may not be worth showing. If everything is in a range of 98 to 100%, may not be worth it. For returning dynamic titles, for returning text, make sure you test it. So this is something, again, that I found out the hard way. People are going to slice and dice data a lot of different ways. So make sure that title is always returning the correct value, or that it's also that it's returning, not returning an error or a blank value, or it's just crashing. You want to make sure that that works. You want to put in some logic in your DAX that says, hey, if this is blank, return this. Or if someone selects this value that doesn't have this value, it returns a blank. And dynamic titles are great for grand totals, slowly changing values, and vanity metrics. This kind of goes back to that reclaiming space point I made, that if someone says, we really need to know this very slowly changing value on a report somewhere, a title is a great place to throw it so it doesn't take up that space on your report. So it's there, but you don't have an entire visual dedicated to it. So what about conditional formatting settings? So this is about as exciting as I can make this slide, but I'll go over these in the demo. But if you're looking at this top, visual right there where it says that's what we call like a rule-based formatting. So it's like saying if this value is greater than or equal to 0.93. So this is a pretty common one, especially for KPIs, where you're defining like the KPIs on the visual, and then you're returning the color for that. That to me is probably one of the most common ones I learned. So based on a field, that's I'd say it's primarily dynamic titles. So you're saying, hey, I'm going to use this measure to return what the title should be, and just use that. There's no color formatting, obviously, in this. There's no returning any if this then that, and you're controlling that in the settings. This might be better explained in the demo. But then the third one, I am going to cover also Power BI built-in operators. So Power BI will suggest some things, and these are definitely useful too, like counts. It'll say, do you just want to do a conditional format quick on counts or distinct counts? And that way you don't have to worry about writing a measure yourself. You can just use the built-in functionality. And finally, based on field, I'll be honest, one of my colleagues who can answer this later, if one of you has questions, he is definitely an expert at returning, like a hex code for a field, or like return in text the word red and it'll show up red. I actually never really use this. So you can do something like that though, and return a string value to set a color. So where and what can you conditionally format? So as I said, the little FX button that you see here is new as of the latest update. It makes it a lot more obvious. Additionally, you see on the right side of the score where it says conditional formatting, it lists a lot of little on-off switches. That's in a matrix or table view. Those still look like that little off-on toggle. But this is what it looks like currently right now. I have here a list of visuals at the top where what's enabled and not enabled. I probably am forgetting some. For example, I know that you can format the categories on card visuals, and I don't have that explicitly listed here, but you can. And as I said, every month it expands a little more. Title bars, you can define the text, the background, and the font, and that's really, really powerful for the hidden visuals for making the title suddenly show up. Overall background, visual backgrounds, you can conditionally format that. This is also good for alerts too. If you want to make it so that the background of visual just pops up bright red when you're selecting a value, you can do that. And finally, tables matrices are where conditional formatting really shines. They have all these different options that you see here. The icons are very cool. It's beyond the scope of today's webinar, but you can actually load in your custom GIFs into the icons and display those, and that's really cool. But we're not going to have time to get into that today. And the most exciting slide in my deck here, common DAX operators. So these are just kind of like my go-to, what I use to return like dynamic titles. So if you are a DAX novice, some of these might be outside your wheelhouse, but I encourage you to learn, especially selected value. It is a fantastic function for grabbing the value on like a slicer or in a table and using that to return a message or to return the value. And formatting, you'll need that for returning numbers in percent values. And then we get into a lot of the conditions, like using if and switch for checking conditions for returning a value, and I'll demo that as well. And these bottom three, concatenate X, length, and kind of text operators, I don't have any examples of this today because again, just from a time perspective, it's a lot to cover. But you know, I don't use these as often, but there's some great demos. There's a great concatenate X demo in a guy in a cube video that you can Google. If you can Google concatenate X and guy in a cube, it's really fantastic. Shows off how cool concatenate X is for returning a list of values, especially, for example, a slicer multi-select. All right. Well, that's about all I wanted to do for the PowerPoint, and I am sure you guys want to see some of this in action, especially if you haven't seen it before. So we'll start with colors because colors are fun, and then the second demo we'll get more into dynamic titles with a little bit of colors. All right. So we'll go through to my sales page. You guys got a preview quick there of what it's going to look like, but here's what we're going to start with. So this is my basic sales dashboard. We'll say it's like, imagine this is my go-to kind of presentation Power BI file. And it's for like a small sales team, a 3-person sales team. And they're kind of like a product reseller. And this is all generated data, none of this is real. And I've got a salesperson slicer over here. You can see that I can select by different salesperson and all the data on the page will update. And I've got things like my overall sales progress and my sales to sales goal. So this is just my sales minus my sales goal divided by my sales goal is a percent. So right now, as of May 2020, this sales team is doing pretty good. They're at 101% of their sales goal for the year. You can see that May is a little behind, but otherwise they're doing great for the year. So let's start with a really easy example, and I'm going to start down here on the quantity sold by product segments. So to kick this off, we go over here to the format pane, data colors. And you see here we've got default color, which is that blue, and this little FX button. So how do I want to format my quantity sold? So I'm going to keep it on this color scale option because we'll explore the rules and field values later. But I don't want to use one of these built-in operators, which I'll show you in a little bit. I want to use one of my measures. So I'm going to use my total sales amount. And this is just very simply my total sales. There's nothing complex about this measure. And lowest to highest, so, light to dark. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to go ahead and turn that on. You can see I've got this nice formatting. Now, we have some good variance here. And you can see that we can go from very white to very dark. But again, I'm worried that this might just be a highly correlated value. I've got a lot of items being sold and some sales amounts. So it might be better to look at something different and practice what I preach. So I'm actually going to change this over to sales margin, which is kind of showing our profit, our revenue minus our cost for these items. And now you see we have some really crazy variance here. We have some of these smaller values have some very, very dark, so some very, very high profit of about 50% sales margin versus 39% sales margin. And a lot of times, Power BI loves to sort things, high to low, but we might want to sort these by, the actual alphabetical order. Because if you're cross-filtering your data and you want to start looking at these things, you might want to see it in the same order each time. So alphabetical might work. And when I do this, I'm getting two metrics very quickly at a glance. I'm able to see a big bar means that we sold a lot of items in this category or in this segment. And I'm able to see the profitability of these segments. And I'm able to keep them in the same order. So without having to sort it from a high to low, I'm getting a quick glance and seeing that some of my segments are very profitable and some of them are not. And some of them are good, pretty profitable, and we sold a lot of items. Maybe that's where we should focus. So let's talk about the built-in operators that I kind of skipped over in the last one. And here I have I'll click off here so you can see the title, total sales by category, right? And I'm going to use one of those built-in operators here. And this one I'm going to say, count of product. But I'm going to do it by distinct. And what is this saying? It's just the number of products in these categories that are being sold, right? So the question is this adding any value? And I would argue that it's not. I mean, of course, the category with a lot of different products that were, maybe that are sold generate a lot of revenue. So I'm not really getting out there. And I also have two very, very small categories that there's not much point in. I can barely make out the conditional formatting. So a lot of times it's better to just not use it. I don't think this is adding much, and by the time I'm finished all this, there's going to be a lot of conditional formatting. So I'm going to leave this one as is. I primarily want to use this so my report users can just cross-filter the data. So next, let's move on to, apologies here, let me look here at my notes. Let's look at another easy one that those of you who were used to Excel might be thinking about when you think of conditional formatting, and that's data bars. So I did want to show off these table options. As I mentioned, here are all the little different on-off toggles. And you can select the field that you want to format. And you'll see here we've got 4 options, but when I switch it over to a numeric field like sales, I get data bars. So I'll toggle that on, and that's it. I didn't have to do anything else. It was that easy. And I actually really love these. And of course, this is because the data works out this way. But again, thinking about that at a glance summary, I can just glance at my customers display here. I can see that the number 5 here, my top 5 customers, is it really one of my top customers? I mean, the difference between number 4 and 5 is quite a bit of money for this year, right? And the same thing if you're cross-filtering. You can see how this is you might have outliers, and I don't have to actually process the numbers. I mean, we can all read the numbers, right? But I don't have to really think about it. I can just glance at it and see, in the rural category, there was one customer who really stood out in sales. And in urban, the top 3 really stand out, and the bottom 2 are much, much lower. So it gives that quick at-a-glance synopsis of your data. Now let's get into a rule-based conditional formatting, because that's probably what a lot of you are curious about, where you can really make a lot of fun colors. So I'm going to go to my gauge here. I'm going to click my FX button. I'm going to change this to be rules. So I am going to make you guys watch me type this out, but I'll try to go as quickly as possible. So I'm going to start on this rule with minimum. This means the absolute minimum that the sales goals can be. And I want it to be that way, because I'm going to say my first KPI for this, I want to say everything below a certain percent. So I'm going to leave this as is where it says minimum. And here, I'm going to put this as 93%. And I'm going to go ahead and select this nice red. I can go ahead and keep adding values here, and I'll say, 93 to 98. And I'll select this yellow. These are very kind of warm red, yellow, green, blue. And this one, by the way, I love KPIs that are not in fixed ranges. You got to do what makes sense for your company. So maybe I want to say, for our company, 98 to 105% sales goal is good. That's the good range we want them to be in. The doing okay range, the 93 to 98%. And I also love a 4th level KPI, because it kind of just highlights where are the exceptional sales happening. So here, I started at 105, and you see I deleted the value here. So it says anything over 105%. I'm going to put this one as this blue. So now I've got a red, yellow, green, blue KPI. And I'll go ahead and hit that. And this gauge formatting, by the way, was pretty recent, I want to say. I can't remember exactly when this is when they introduced this, but it's nice. So I can click through. I've got some pretty consistent over 100%. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Live demoing, folks. You got to select the right measure. Let me find the sales goal. Sales to goal. That's the measure I should be using. There we go. So if you click through, we can see that Daniel here is doing okay. Eliza's doing great, and Jack is doing well, right? So the gauge changes with my highlighting, and it'll do the same for the months too. We see that in May, the team's doing okay, versus April, they're doing great. All right, so back to a table breakdown, I want to show you icons. Icons are very cool. They're really easy to use, and they also really provide that at-a-glance detail. So if I go to turn on icons, you see it made some defaults for me because I've used this before. I'm going to go in and set these icons up. So let's walk through all these options too, because I want you to see what we're doing here. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with rules. And I'm going to go ahead and apply it. This is a new option that was added recently for subtotals and totals. So I want to make sure my conditional formatting applies to my total at the bottom as well. And for my field, I want to compare it. I want to use my compared to last year's. This is just my sales to previous year measure. And in the interest of time, I won't go over the measure, but it's pretty much just the same thing we've been talking about. It's a percent of this year a value compared to the values of last year. Now, where do I want this icon to be? So I already selected that I want it to be on the, actually it's on the price field. Sorry, folks, I'm going to change this to the product. I want it to be next to the product. All right, sorry about that. So I want to apply this values and totals. And we did sales. Just search for the word previous. I'm sorry, last year. There we go. Okay. And I want this to appear to the right of my product name, just to make it easy for that at a glance I talked about. And I mentioned arrows. I love these little arrows, so I'll go ahead and turn those on. And now I just need to set these percents. So my percent is going to be a negative percent or a positive percent. It's just our sales up or down from the previous year. So for red, I want it to be that minimum value we talked about and less than 0. And for this middle option, I'll go ahead and keep the yellow arrow, but I want this to be about 0. So maybe sales are unchanged. So I'm going to set this to literally is 0. And then finally, for my other option here, I want to say greater than, because I don't want to say greater than or equal to, but greater than 0. And the less than, we want that to just be a maximum value. We don't want to set it at anything, just in case. So there you go. So we have red and then this kind of sideways yellow for unchanged, which also you could just change it to no icon. And there you go. Oh, I'm sorry, I left my price formatting on. I'll turn that off real fast. There we go. So I have this quick synopsis of my product data compared to last year. I can glance at it and say, hey, sales are up, sales are down. There we go. Very easy to use. And of course, as I cross filter, these data will update as well on my product table. And then finally, the example you saw in the slides, which was the trending sales. I'm sure you guys don't want to watch me sit through and type all those values again. So I'm just going to cheat a little bit here. And I'm just going to grab the already formatted version from my Scratch page here. And this is the same rule-based KPI I used over here on the gauge. And now I have all this nice color formatting. And as I sort by my folks, or filter by my folks, I can see these data change. So I can see, in May, Jack here is doing really well versus Eliza, who's falling behind our sales goal. And these sales goals are all customized for each person on here. And that about wraps up the color part of the demo. And as you can see, we ended up with a much more colorful option than we started out with. But we still want to get on to dynamic titles, right? So for dynamic titles, I said colors were really fun, but from a technical standpoint, this is kind of cooler. So let's see what we can do with kind of adding some dynamic title spice to our sales dashboard. All right, so for my trending sales, when I slice by someone, I have to keep looking over here to the left to see what who I'm slicing by, right? And I want to make that a little easier on myself. So I'm going to walk through coding one of these, and then for the rest of them, just to save time, I'll just show you the measure and kind of walk through it. So I'm going to call this one, let's say, trending salesperson. And I mentioned DAX variables and selected values. So I want to grab the name of a salesperson. So I'm going to call this var salesperson. I'm going to use selected value here to grab the salesperson name being filtered. And then I'm going to return that value with a simple if condition. I'm going to say, if is blank. So if there's no, we use my variable there. So if there's no salesperson selected, I want to keep the title the same it is now. I'm going to say trending sales, right? But if it's not blank, I want it to also say who it is. So I'm going to say trending sales, put a little space here. Make sure you always include the space in your string value so your text isn't bunched up next to each other. And I'm just going to put an ampersand to connect the string. And I'll use that variable. So real fast again, we're saying, hey, grab the name of the salesperson, return it. And if that value is blank, just return trending sales, but otherwise return the trending sales plus the salesperson's name. And I'll click off so you can see the result. Nothing's happened, right? Well, because we got to turn it on. So we'll go over, select our visual, go to the format pane, we'll go down here to title. And I mentioned title, you can format the text, the font, and the background. But our interest here is in the text. You can see there's no options here for, for text-based formatting. This is all we can do. So I'm going to go find that title. I'll search for the word title. And there we go. So it says trending sales Daniel. When I unselect him, it just says trending sales. And likewise, it'll update here. So now I can just get that value and return it here. And it makes a lot easier to just remind myself who I'm looking at. And let's take this one step further. Let's say we also wanted to make sure we were looking at the right year so we can remind ourselves what year it is. So I'll just go ahead and add another variable. I'm going to call it, you name your variables whatever you want. But I want to show you the second option on selected value. So I'm going to grab the year. But this second option is for an alternate result. So if I have no year selected, what do you want to return? I just want to have it say all years. I'll capitalize it, right? Now, how do we alter our if statement to grab this? Oops, let me cross out my function there. So I want this all years to show up no matter what. So I'm going to add this to if there's no salesperson selected. But I also want to add it down here too. So again, don't forget your spaces so that your values aren't crunched up together. So all I did here was add my year selection value to both of my conditions for if there's a salesperson not selected and if there's a salesperson selected. And there we go. So we have trending sales, Jack 2020. Eliza. If I deselect 2020, it says all years. And if I deselect Eliza, I get trending sales all years. And there we go. So it works exactly how I hoped. Although again, just like I said in my PowerPoint, test, test, test. You want to make sure it works for however your folks are slicing their data. All right, so we're doing okay on time. So I'm going to hopefully get through another couple examples to show you what else we can do. So another thing I talked about was reclaiming space. So I want to move this sales goal up here, and I want to put something else here. So let me show you another fun use of the title formatting. So I'm going to change the sales goal into a static past 2 months sales. So what this is saying, hey, for the past two months, think of it as a rolling quarter. I want to know what the sales are. And no matter what I change my data to, it's saying for Daniel, since March 1st, he's made $98,000 in sales. So I want to go ahead and I've already, I want to show you what it looks like, the DAX measure looks like, that is. And I want to go ahead and return the sales amount, but ignore all calendar filters, but except for this filter that I'm specifying, which is kind of a rolling condition for saying these rows in the calendar table are in the past 2 months. But really, this lecture, right, is about conditional formatting and dynamic titles. So let me show you, I explained, you guys may have had a hard time understanding what I was saying about as a rolling quarter. Well, it's kind of hard to understand. So maybe I want to display that information in the title of this card. So I'll change to say title past 2 months sales. And that's going to show me what the date was, sales since March 1st, 2020. And I'll show you the measure as well. So I want to show you guys returning a date value into a dynamic title. So for this one, this is very similar to my total sales amount for the past 2 months. I'm just saying return to me the earliest date in the date table that has this flag of past 2 months. And you see here, I don't have any if condition or selected value. It's very simply just return this variable, sales since this date value. So if I were to keep looking at this and June 1st rolls around, this would automatically update to say April 1st, 2020, when the data set would refresh. So it's pretty easy to return a date value too, similar to returning our year values. I can just grab this value from the calendar table and use that. Now I mentioned reclaiming space and getting that sales goal up here on the gauge, like you may have seen and remember from the PowerPoint. So let's take a quick look at what that measure looks like. It's very simple, right? We're saying that this title, new title, I'm going to have a sales goal, and then I'm going to just format the sales goal as a %. But before I do that, I want to show you guys what it looks like, because you might encounter this yourself when you use this. Oops. I want to show you what it looks like when you just say, sales goal is this %, and put that on my title. So let's go to our title option in the format pane, and go ahead and turn this on. Title sales goal. Now here, look at this precision on this %. It is not formatted at all, right? So even though my measure is formatted to 2 decimal places, when I write this in as a text value, as a string value into this title, it just goes on and on and on. So you definitely want to use that format DAX function. This was also in the PowerPoint, and it's great for formatting your string values for when you return them in these titles. And Power BI makes this easy. I can just literally type the word %, and it will automatically turn it into a % with 2 decimal places. If you want to format it any more than this, I would suggest, go look at the format documentation online on Microsoft's website, and you can go really deep into this and format it to 3 decimal places, with no % sign if you want it. You can do a lot of this. The formatting function has a ton of different options. But for our purposes, the % works fine. So we see it's 101%. And the same thing, if I go ahead and change my salespersons, you'll see my sales goal up here is changing with them. So now I have that sales goal. I've reclaimed that space, and that's another added bonus. All right, folks, I'm going to pause at the time here. We're just about out of time. I'm just going to very quickly show you the last bit, which was in the alert that I showed in the PowerPoint. So you see here I've got what looks like a blank card, and it's not blank. It's just the values only show up when I select things. So I'm going to put that right here on my trend chart, and later on I would maybe layer this and put this behind it. This is a transparent trend chart. But for now, let me just show you what it does. So when I select a single month, the conditional formatting I've set up, well, first I've got a measure that returns nothing if there's not a month selected, and then I've got a title that tells me the sales goal %. But if I select a red month, I get this formatted title that not only does it change the text to sales below minimum, but it also turns the background red. So again, we don't have a lot of time left, but I will show you, I'll walk you through all 3 measures really quickly, right? So the measure that's returning the number is just saying, grab the month value, and if the month value is blank, if I don't have a month selected, then return nothing. But otherwise, return the formatted % value. And that's what it's doing right now. When I click off of it, the number disappears because of that. And that same kind of logic is used for the text values as well. So here's the text value of the title, and it's saying, hey, when a month is grab the month value, and if there's no month selected, make it blank. But if the % value is below 93%, return this text of sales below minimum. But otherwise, just return this sales goal, the word sales goal, not the measure, but the word sales goal %. And then finally, the very, very simple formatting option, same logic, grab the month, return the month, and say if it's blank, return nothing. Oh, I'm sorry, that is the number. I apologize. I feel like I knew I was going to mess this up too when I made it. Here we go. Sorry. This is just saying if the sales goal alert is below 93%, return the number 1, otherwise 0. So here we're saying if it's going to be below our minimum threshold, return the number 1, otherwise 0. And if you're wondering why, all 1, 0, this is what I mentioned in the PowerPoint. We want to base our formatting of our background, that red background, saying based on this alert, if it's 1, that measure, make it red, but if it's not below the alert, make it gray. So 0. So return. So again, this is where I said you have to return a numeric value for your conditions. So I just want to return a simple 1, 0 flag for the alerts. I want the background to be red. For otherwise, I want it to be gray. And that allows us to, whenever a month is selected, show our goal. And on our bad months, change the text in the title and change it to red. And I know I had to kind of race that last example, but that was the one I wanted to show you, the kind of the power of almost hiding visuals using conditional formatting. So without further ado, I think we can get to Q&A section. I saw some questions already popping up. I know Andrew. Hey, Andrew, by the way. Yeah, this recording will be available later on. So if I went a little fast for anyone, we'll post this to our blog with a YouTube link and kind of a recap of it, and you can rewatch this and look carefully at my decks. Yeah, and thanks, Daniel. Daniel, thanks for popping in that lots of data or lots of answering all the questions. So again, folks, some people have already been using the Q&A function, but if you hover over the Zoom window, you should see that Q&A button. You can use that to ask any question. And Daniel and I will do our best to read it out and answer it. So please let me open there. Oh, great question, John. So John's asking, and I'm going to repeat these questions for the webinar because we can't. I don't think we can show the Q&A anyway in the video later. So John is asking, can you use custom color codes to change a map visual, like state or city values? That's a great question. I would think so, but I honestly don't have enough experience with maps, and I've never conditionally formatted a map. So
I'm doing a test on that right now, really quickly, to be able to answer that.
Daniel Villarreal, folks, he's on top of it. So yeah, so John, we'll get an answer to you hopefully soon. I can't imagine, I mean, I feel like I've seen conditionally formatted maps, so I would imagine so. Where it's kind of like the state is like a filled value, but I don't know the limitations on it, because there might be some.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that's any of the values we can change. Only the title and actually the background color, funny enough, of states. But other than that, you wouldn't be able to change any bubbles or anything like that, only whenever you're highlighting a specific state.
All right, so I figured there would probably be some limitations because I think cities would be kind of crazy. That would seem like that would just crash things, so like a memory problem.
Well, I think states and background color of those states are the only things that can really change. Cities, I think there's a little bit too much variance there, but I think maybe for bubble maps, it may be possible, but they're just now starting to get to this functionality on maps. I think this is a relatively new option for updating color within maps in general. I know maps are usually the last to get any of the major updates.
Yeah. All right, folks. We still have quite a few minutes here, I think. So, any other questions? And I think on the webinar recap page that we'll have on our blog, I'll put some of the code I use for these kind of like selected values, variables, if this then that. I'll put that on the page too, so you could easily copy paste it and play with it yourself, just so you don't have to like stare at the video and carefully type it in, like pause the video and carefully type it in. All right, seeming pretty quiet. I'm going to go ahead and just move on to our last slide here. So upcoming webinars, we have a Getting Started with Power BI, which is not about learning Power BI from like a developer point of view, but for your organization getting started with Power BI. Like what all the steps are for data governance, licensing, training, what we recommend. This is going to be done by George Stark, our director. George, sorry to put you on the spot. Did you want to chime in anything about this that I'm missing?
No, this is something that's it's something I'm passionate about. Just a sneak preview of the next webinar for those of you who are interested. I think I'll probably, while Greg mentioned some future topics, I'll probably focus on my favorite part of the journey of moving to BI with Power BI is really the people aspect. So a little teaser for 2 weeks from now.
We're talking about culture and things like that.
Indeed, yeah,
All
culture,
right.
resource planning, HR planning. What do you do with your people? How do you manage people in the change? The change from where you are today to where you want to go with Power BI.
Fantastic. All right, and I'll go ahead and plug the pug here. So Houston Power BI User Group, we are meeting 1 week from today. The Zoom invite will be posted soon with the information. It's similar to this, but a little more informal, and we'll have 3 presentations, one on row level security, one on Power Apps integration and Power BI, and a presentation on data transformation that will be good for beginners. Just kind of using IM and a little bit of applied IM and Power Query, but also some of the built-in transformations. I know you guys can't click those links, but if you just Google, like I said, the meetup group, you can find that. But also our Power BI user group forums, Houston Power BI user group, you'll find the official forums for it as hosted by the Microsoft support community. And finally, feel free to check out our blog. We have lots of good Power BI blog posts coming up. We have a few up already, and I've got 3 in the hopper that will be coming out over the next couple months. So they'll be going to data modeling basics and date tables, and then we'll get into some building report stuff. So feel free to check us out and follow our blog, and follow us on LinkedIn. That's a good place too. Cassandra, is there anything I forgot?
Nope, that all sounds and looks great, Greg. Thank you so much for doing an amazing job with the webinar. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to sales@ironedgegroup.com to see how we can maybe help you guys. Everyone that attended and registered for this webinar will get a follow-up email from our marketing team within the next 24 to 48 hours with a link to the recording, as well as some extra material that we might want to add in addition to the links that we've posted here for you guys to explore and play around with. But thank you all for coming.
All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good day.